What the is we doing?
All right. So it's been closer to a month, if not a little bit more. Last time we had a conversation, we had our first guest on. So thank you again. And now we're going to go back to a regularly scheduled program where it's just two of us. Um, Obviously, once we have more opportunities to get guests on, we'll definitely go about having them. I know that you mentioned that you had a monk that you wanted to bring on, but when you sent me that message, it was way too late for us to hop on and have that conversation with them. But
Yeah.
there'll always be more opportunities. It's just about making sure that it's at the right times. So today's conversation is going to be facing our fears. So we were having a little chat here, and we were having issues coming up with a situation where you actually had to face a fear, right? Because you said you don't think you have one, or you've maybe already dealt with facing your fears a while ago. So at this point, you don't really have many,
Mhm.
if at all you have one, right? So, maybe we can just start it from that point. So why don't you think you have any fears at this point to conquer?
Well, first of all, hello everybody. Let's take a shot. I have this mini water bottle
Yeah.
of here.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate. Well, yeah, I actually recently got asked this question about what was my biggest fear. I actually didn't end up answering this question just because I had a really hard time thinking of one. And yeah, I think the reason for it is just that I always been the type of person that if something scares me, I will actually just go for it and I would actually try to do it and just like conquer it. I think that always been me ever since I was a little kid. I think looking back, kind of like looking back into my childhood or even just my teenage age, I think one of my biggest fear would have been like to feel alone or not that sense that me being alone like you can you can be alone. I mean, you cannot be alone or you can be surrounded by people but yet still feel alone. So I think that was one thing that always scared me. But solo traveling, I realized that, I mean, even before that, I always started being comfortable with myself. I started being comfortable being alone, doing things on my own. Like I would go to restaurants, to bars on my own, and I never felt uncomfortable, felt scared anymore. Whereas that thought in the past, when I was a child or a teenage, it was probably scary. Like it was a bit scary to me to do it. Just uncomfortable. It just kind of like anxious. I think I would have been a little bit anxious of
Mhm.
just gonna like overthinking about like people thinking of me or like he's speaking. And then ultimately I think it's just a matter of practice and just actually doing it that you start becoming comfortable. And that's why I really truly I haven't felt alone even right now that I'm completely alone. In because I booked myself a nice room just because I've been hostel to hostel and I just needed to recharge my social energy. And yeah, I mean, you know, even if I'm alone, I don't feel alone. Like I can do stuff by myself, I can go hiking by myself, and ultimately I just make end up making friends at some point on the way, and that's the beauty of it. And I think I think being alone and just doing things alone is kind of like a superpower because you don't own anything to anyone. So you're accountable for your actions yourself. And also you can run on your own schedule. But and I think that's one of the reasons also like um my previous relationships doesn't work because it's hard to be attached to somebody and just like give my time or make my time for that specific person, you know. And I think as I kind of like been through that, I started kind of like meditating, realizing this type of things recently. But yeah, I think that's kind of like the only fear. Like, when people talk about like insects scorpions, or just, heights. At some point, I did fear heights. This happened in Ecuador. I remember my uncle was in the process of constructing his house, and it wasn't finished, so the floor was opened. And at some point, I went up. I was able to cross through this bin. I crossed it, but at the moment of coming back, I looked down and I started kind of like having this panic or having like this scare. And yeah, I remember clearly because that was the only time I always fear, fear heights. Like I never in my life fear heights. But that moment, I truly, truly felt scared. But then eventually I just like it started kind of like hugging the bin and cross like this. So eventually, it worked out. So yeah, aside of that, I don't know. What about you? What do you think is your fear? What's something that scares you the most?
I mean, throughout my life, there's been a lot of different things, right? But in a similar fashion as you, kind of just facing them or being exposed to them repeatedly, that has a tendency of, getting rid of the fear. I mean, I'm pretty sure in the back of our minds, we probably always have a sense, but it's not something that stops us, right?
Yeah.
So, we did. Well, I mean, for me personally, I didn't want to jump off that bridge in Ecuador. So with the height situation, I'm not 100% there yet. But over time, again, just putting yourself in a lot of different situations where you get exposed to it, you become somebody that, regardless of the fears there, you have enough, I guess the expression would be courage to overcome it. And, over time, it just becomes this person of, or you become the type of person that does the thing regardless of a fear.
Yeah.
And that becomes huge, right? Like that's what makes the difference between an individual that can perform versus an individual that will freeze, right? We have that fight or flight response system in our body, right?
Mhm.
So if you can perform regardless of the situation, that puts you above and beyond a majority of people. I would say like probably 90% of people, because most people have a tendency of not doing the thing that they're afraid or never doing or facing their fears simply because they can't get over that hurdle. And over time, that becomes a detriment because you don't get to experience life in its full capacity. And don't
Mhm.
get me wrong, like there's reasons as to why we have fears, right? Because whatever the situation might be, in our hindbrain, through millions of years of development, we have become understanding of certain scenarios and certain situations where perhaps you had an ancestor that was a distant relative or cousin that ended up dying because they were crossing a big ravine and it was really high and he slipped and he fell and he fell like 200 feet to his death or something. So that's a hindbrain fear. That's something that's within us innately. So again, it's normal, but understanding that the situation isn't as dire as it seems really puts you in an advantageous position to actually execute. For me, I can definitely tell you one of the things that I had an issue with when I was younger was just having social dynamic or social conversations with people.
Mhm.
Didn't really necessarily feel comfortable talking to other people if I didn't know them well. I couldn't necessarily, just spark up conversations with just strangers. Over time, that ended up becoming something that is a not necessarily a superpower at this point, but it's something that I'm pretty good at simply because of the nature of my work. What I do as a profession requires me to be social, right? And it requires me to build a sense of trust and rapport with an individual on a relatively quick time frame, right? That's the nature of sales. And the better you get at it, the better you have interactions with people. And as a reward, you make more sales.
Mhm.
So that again, that goes back to the more you expose yourself to these things that you are fearful of, if you have the ability and you have the strength to overcome it, again, with courage and bravery, that will then allow you to experience life in a different way. And then over time, it starts becoming something you might actually enjoy, right?
Yeah.
Some people, maybe they start off being afraid of heights, and at some point they get to a point where they start doing bungee jumping because they like heights now, right? So it's always a progression of these things. And usually people And at least people that are successful use fear as a compass, right? If I'm fearful of this thing, it's probably something I should do simply because I will be better on the other side of doing it. Nobody really knows how it's going to benefit you in the long run, but that opportunity. So again, going back to my situation of not being comfortable talking to people, because now I am comfortable talking to people, I can easily network and take that networking and then allow me to have better opportunities, whether that be in relation to work, meeting new friends, traveling opportunities, whatever it is. But that overcoming of the fear allowed me to enhance my life. And in a similar fashion, whatever fear you have, you might have the same benefit if you go out of your way to overcome it.
Yeah, actually, you bring a really great point there. The fact that you were scared to be social back then, and now you're the most social. And I think similarly to me, it probably growing up, I was afraid to be alone, and now I actually enjoy being alone time to time. So
Mhm.
it kind of flips once you conquer your fear. And yeah, I think using that to your advantage, or just using it as fuel, can be really, really how you call that? How you call that? And it's beneficial. I think that's the word I'm looking for to your life, just because it's kind of like the baby step that you need to take in order to keep doing other risky stuff, because you already conquered your biggest fear. So now I can go ahead, and you do feel powerful. You get the adrenaline that you're conquering your biggest fear. So now I can take more risk, even a risk that I never thought I would take in the past. And yeah, I think it's kind of like a domino effect, whereas that one piece moves and everything else follows. So yeah, whatever fear it is, I definitely recommend going. You cannot just go at once, because that can be also not productive. It can give you trauma, actually. So it should be kind of like a small step. So if you scare off heights, go for a hike that is a little bit, certain altitude, then, progress as that is, and then you just start conquering your fears, conquering your, how you call that? Scaredness, I think. Yeah, my English is
These are
bad,
fair, right?
but yeah.
And one thing that I want to know, right?
Uh-huh.
Again, it's not like, for me, it's not a matter that like I'm now the most social person, but it's a skill that I've acquired because, again, I overcame the fear. So now when I need to turn it on, I can. If I need to be very social because we're in an event or a gathering, or again, I'm in front of a lot of people, I can turn it on. But oftentimes I like being alone and like, not necessarily talking to people. It's kind of where I'm comfortable. But again, it's something that I have now in my back pocket, in my arsenal of tools to utilize. Again, we're just using fear or fear of heights as a placeholder, right? Like it can be anything. Maybe a fear of water, fear of swimming, fear of drowning.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things out there that people can be afraid of, but overcoming them more often than not, and I would say, again, 90% of the time, if you're able to overcome them, it's going to be an enhancement to your life and the abilities and the skills that you have. And that
Yeah.
will provide you more opportunities.
Actually, the person that asked me about my biggest fear, it was this girl that we met, and I was having snails as a dish, and apparently it was her biggest fear, snails. It's as simple as that. It's the snails. So it can be something very simple that it actually panics people off, or it scares them off. But I actually convinced her to give it a try, and she ate it. So I was very proud of her that she did, because she ultimately conquered her fear, and she felt the same way. She wouldn't do it again. That's what she told me, but ultimately she did it. She knows now what it feels to eat it. Well, she was afraid of the alive thing, but similarly. So I think, we shouldn't really judge or compare ourselves, like our fears. Like, for example, if you fear a small spider, whereas a heights, which is completely different, kind of like length of dangerousness of the
Yeah, it's a spectrum, right? But again, I go back to like that hindbrain response, right? So again, being afraid of fear because in our past, people fell off high, big altitudes and they died. In the same way, maybe you saw somebody die because they got bit by a venomous spider. All right, like all these things can be interconnected in some way. Afraid of drowning because you've seen people go underwater and not come back up and they died.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be something that's like in our
Crazy.
distant ancestry, right? Like it could be something that happened when you were young, and it can be a traumatic experience, and now you have that fear. But again, overcoming it will always be a better place to be at.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very important to kind of like analyze and think it through, like what is something that scares you the most, and put yourself in a position that, exposed you to certain limits or certain quantity to this fear, whatever it is, and go from there, kind of like start conquering it, because you do feel powerful, you do feel like empowered to actually go work towards conquering this fear. And trust me, like you probably won't, like the fear probably won't go away, but you are comfortable enough to put yourself in a position to be exposed to it or be there, that it doesn't really bother you anymore. But the fear is still there.
It's like dealing with getting rejected, right? If you approach somebody that you find attractive,
Right.
there's always just going to be this fear of rejection, right? Like you don't want to get rejected because for whatever reason or not, whether you were younger or just the innate fear of being rejected and humiliated, that's something that stops a lot of people. But if you're able to overcome that, there's a lot of people that you might meet that are really good for you, but because you weren't able to pass that hurdle of just interacting with them initially, you never get to meet them.
Correct. Yeah, I think the fear of rejection is very common among men mostly. So yeah, I think that's a thing. But for me personally, it felt more that the more you do it, the more comfortable you become being rejected. So like you start analyzing these social cues to when it's time to leave, you know. So I think that comes with practice as well. So like anything, like I mentioned before. But yes, conquering your fears. Ta-da! Yeah, I'm still trying to think like one specific thing that scared me. Like food or animal. Are you scared of any animals?
I mean, if you come across a lion or a bear, I guess, but I think that's because, if you interact with them in a bad environment, then you're probably going to die. But I think that's normal. So that
Right.
might be a fear there, right? But not to the sense of like, it stops me from doing anything. I don't have that kind of fear that makes me freeze. At least not anymore. I've gone out of my way to overcome them or expose myself to them enough that now it's not really too much of an issue.
So what used to freeze you, like, at some point
It was that. It was just interacting.
with people?
Maybe not even people. Maybe going up to a girl and approaching her, and telling her that I had an interest, found her attractive, and then from there, hopefully have that go into something else.
Yeah, but I think
Again,
everybody went through that. Like even went through that at some point.
exactly, but it's something that we conquered, right? Because due
Yeah.
to repetition, again, being able to be social regardless of the situation, and that's a skill that you learn simply due to exposure, right? What you
Yeah.
do for work, how do you interact in the environments you're in, right? So if you're going to school, are you the individual that just like sits in the back of the class, doesn't talk to anybody, or do you go out of your way to, ask somebody for help with the homework or ask somebody for whatever assistance you need in relation to a question that was asked, whatever. Going out to parties or social gatherings. I know you got involved in a fraternity, etc.
Whole game, baby. Come on.
Yeah.
You develop your game through the years, I think, eventually. But I think every man goes through that rite of passage where, they're shitting their pants to go and talk to a girl, and then eventually after probably like 10, 20 rejections, they start getting comfortable and be more confident in doing it. I think it's just a rite of passage for a lot of men, in my opinion. But yeah, I think I had shit in my pants too, also talking to like a pretty girl, especially if they're like really pretty. Like I sometimes be like, I used to get like a little bit shaky, but then eventually I start changing my mindset that she's another person, another woman, another human being. And that changes completely. And like I can literally just spark a conversation with like any girl or honestly anybody, to the point that yeah, become friends and just hang out and stuff. But anyways, going from there, I think yeah, I don't have much to add actually. Conquering your fears. I, I always been fearless in a sense that whatever somebody challenged me to do it, like it can be cliff jumping or it can be bungee jumping or anything. Actually, I've only done bungee jumping once, but like it can be like anything, like even like go and climb this building just for the random reason because I'm daring you. I would actually go and do it. Like I always been that type of person that somebody challenges me, I accept the challenge and I try to win, and I
That's
most
good. That again, and that's more of a mindset more than anything else, right? It's your
yeah.
ability to you're willing to try anything once at least just to see how things go, and
Yeah,
then from there, that's
like
it. You have that in your back pocket, right? Like you know
uh,
you're able to do this thing,
yeah.
or not. I don't
And
know.
also and also his experience. For example, like this solo backpacking trick, I knew I will do it eventually in my life, and then the right pieces in my life move. Well, they didn't move, but they felt, because I went through the breakup and then also got fired from my job. And then it was like, shit. I actually told your girlfriend, Victoria, I was like, yo, I might go live in an island. I still remember because the next day I was in the gym and then I was like, why I don't do that? And then here I am, 3 months later, still traveling. And we just had a conversation earlier that I might extend it. And, it's just happens. Life happens
Yep.
in a funny way. So yeah,
Yeah, man.
conquer your fears, knowing that you're able to do it, whatever you put your mind to it, and also just able to be comfortable in situations where in the past you used to shed your pants is important, just because it truly empowers you and it truly allows you to do more risky stuff and take risk in, like, whether it's a business idea or just interviews or just meeting people, meeting a partner. And I think is very, very essential for somebody young, you know. But
For sure, man. Again, like it makes a huge improvement in life quality, especially in the long run. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And I think we've hit all the points in relation to hitting your fears. Make sure you do them. If you feel like there's something in your life that scares you to the point where you freeze, that's a direction that you might want to consider trying to go.
yeah,
Whether it be solo backpacking, interacting with people, because again, it's going to lead you down this road of developing new skills, being able to, again, just navigate through life in such a way where whatever you come across, you know personally that you'll be able to come out the other side successful. And that's huge, right? Because if you can put yourself in any type of environment and know that you'll be okay, you're not going to be afraid to do anything, right? So then that's what allows you to take the risk to level up and get to the next point in your life, right? Like if you're afraid to leave your job because you need security, again, that's something that you might want to face. And you might have a passion project that you're working on, and it's something that if it actually is successful, you will be like 10 times better than you are currently. But because you're fearful of leaving and you want to keep that security, you never do. So you never get to experience life on the other side. So
yeah. So like even if you fail while conquering your fears, I think just the lesson itself is an experience and you will learn something out of it. So yeah, depending on the type of fear, like we said, there's a huge spectrum from animals to heights to being just in closed space. it just depends on how you react between the spectrum. So if it's like from the middle to the low kind of like reaction, like you're not gonna die type of fear, then just go for it. But if it's like from the middle to, you endanger your life, definitely progress, like baby steps until you do the actual thing. I think that's kind of like my way I would do it, to be honest. But yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
I think we can wrap that up there. And yeah, cheers, mates. It's good talking to you again. Salute.
Always.
Empty water bottle. This is a conversation between friends.
None of what is said here should be taken as legal advice.
We are not experts in any way.
Take what resonates and leave the rest.